Conversations. I am here with the one and only Paul Sheesley. And y'all, we're just going to do a quick little live lesson on Restream and how to make this work. We were just setting up our Restreams and connecting his account, my account. We both have, Paul, do you still have Instagram pulled up in the other tab?
Let's see. I do.
Go ahead and click go live. And y'all, that is how we connect Restream. It is kind of it's been an interesting learning curve for those of you who are tuning in regarding using a third-party streaming platform. When we first started doing the Knowing podcast, we did everything live in person, and we didn't have to figure out kind of the virtual person on the other side. How do we make this work? And so as we started the Knowing show, which is originating on kind of an online platform tool and then turning into a daily podcast, we had to figure out how to connect Instagram, how to connect LinkedIn and Facebook, and then on the back end, how to turn it into a podcast. So just for those of you who are tuning in and ever think about doing something like this yourself, I really love Restream. It has been a little funky trying to figure out how both us and the guests can go live at the same time. And Instagram is a very funky tool. You have to have the platform itself pulled up in another window and then press go live on Instagram and press go live in Restream. So it's a funky process, but it's worth figuring out. So with all that, Paul Sheesley, welcome to the Knowing Show. I'm so happy to have you.
And it is a funky process because I do not see the go live button. Yeah.
Well, we'll figure it out. We'll just have you on here another time. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
Paul, I have had the privilege of working alongside you, partnering with you for the last 5 years. So I have seen the evolution of your therapeutic practice, the new evolvement of your coaching practice. You've attended Harvard. You are an incredible individual, to say the least, and it's been such a privilege working with you. So I would love for you to have the mic and introduce yourself. Who are you, Paul Sheesley?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't think I can do it as much as you did. So yes, Paul Sheesley. I'm an executive performance coach as well as a psychotherapist in the Northeast region of the United States, so specifically in Washington, D.C. And I've been in the psychological field, executive coaching for the last 2 decades, and 20 years of education and research and practice and psychological and human behavior. And here I am, ready to talk about how wonderful I am.
Well, Paul, we actually were just before this. We were having a conversation, just the two of us, and I realized I didn't have a guest for today's show, and partially it wasn't just that I didn't not have a guest for today, but also you and I were supposed to have a conversation on Friday. You're no longer able to do that because you have been subpoenaed. Would you share why?
Yes. So in the many workings of my profession, I don't usually talk about it, but I have a background in forensic psychology, and so it is not. I often work within the court system, and in this regard, specifically doing assessments for like reunification of families, post high conflict divorce that often involve children, young children, even adolescents. And so oftentimes a report is not enough, and I have to attend, and I have to be my report cross-examined and asked lots and lots of questions, and being subpoenaed in these situations is not an option, nor oftentimes do I want it to be optional, because there's often children and adolescents that are behind this major decision, and so I'm a part of that, and really wouldn't have it any other way.
And with this reunification, it's not necessarily like drugs or alcohol or imprisonment. It's just these two families are really, these two individuals, the two spouses are trying to figure out how to basically coexist post-divorce with their children. Is that fair?
Yeah, coexist, co-parent, parallel parent, all some of those other buzzwords, and really taking into to consideration, the best interests of the children, as far as the environments that that they're going to really exist in, and so looking at their developmental stages, the relationships that they have with the parents, and many, many, many other factors over hours and hours of assessment, to really help determine what's in the best interest of the children, and how the relationships
Huh.
play a role in their development. So yeah, yeah, it's there's a lot of there's so many moving parts.
Yes. Well, what I really appreciate, I've always thought, I just have thought that when you get divorced, you just kind of are like, unless one of you has a big desire to not have custody,
Mhm.
effectively you pretty much both get 50-50 custody. But what's
Yeah,
interesting in what you're saying is that this actually, they make the decision on the custody and the cohabitating
yeah,
and co-parenting
yeah,
based on truly what's best for the child. And so that's
yeah.
where the therapist needs to be involved so that you can assess the health of the child and the health of the parent, where it's really
Hmm.
not, oh, well, I want 50%, you want 50%. Okay, cool. It's
Yeah.
That's so important. So honestly, Paul, my question for you is, are there more cases where we should be having these conversations when parents do split up, where the dad and mom both want 50%, let's say, but the health of the kid is that they go with dad, maybe, which is unusual.
Yeah. Hmm.
Usually, I
Hmm.
think historically it's been they go with, the court side with the mom. But I've been
Yeah.
seeing more and more times where we've got some really involved dads.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of these, there's no cookie cutter, and kind of outline for a lot of the decisions that are often made. Sometimes decisions are made, and it's not. It's very much uncertain as to where that came from, and so it's
Mhm.
uh,
Right.
sometimes, and I'll probably get slack for this, but the court system, especially when it comes to reunification, is almost like a wild west because it really depends on what jurisdiction you're in. It depends on the judge. There's so many factors that play a role in that, and
Mm,
sometimes there's disappointing decisions, and sometimes there's decisions that were really justified. And I just my job, quite frankly, is to stay in my lane, right? And to have the
mhm.
most objective and point of view that is, with integrity, and I'm able to justify and back it up, and to be able to give an opinion that is based on clinical psychological relevance that I can observably and objectively present my rationale for, and then really the rest is up to everyone else that's involved, which is often the attorneys and the
Right.
magistrate or the judge. So
Good.
yeah, yeah,
Glad that that's happening. Paul, there's a number of things that we could talk about. I want to talk about conscious leadership today.
sure,
You've got three core pillars that really
yes,
guide you and your work. And so, do you mind just taking us through these three pillars? If you wouldn't mind sharing, what is each one, why each
sure,
one matters, and then the transformation that comes as a result of how to
yeah.
incorporate these three pillars to become a conscious leader.
Yeah. So the three pillars, I'll just name the three. It's your inner architecture, your strategic alignment, and your adaptive leadership, right? And so, um, I like the concept of pillars because in themselves they do stand alone, but they also all together need to hold up something great, right? Which is very much a conscious leader, who is be able to transcribe, their
Right.
leadership capability externally, right?
Mhm.
So talking about the singular pillars, starting with inner architecture, that's super important. And I like the inner architecture because we're all built differently, right? It's a
Mhm.
constellation of beliefs and emotions and needs that really drive decision making.
Right.
Whether you're just the person walking down the street or you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, you've got beliefs, you have emotions, and you have these needs, right? And so it matters. It really matters, this inner architecture, because we want leaders and executives in any C-suite category, in those to be able to have clarity, and I'd say specifically like clarity over chaos, like whether that's inner chaos or external, but specifically internally, it's just so important to be able to identify, like just being able to identify like what is it that I'm maybe fearing, right?
Mm,
Which I often talk about fear and burnout, because when we're in a fear state or an anxious state, it seizes our ability to be reactive in like the firefighting of the daily management or leadership role that we have. And so being
yeah.
able to like restore access to strategic thinking in our mindset
Mm,
is so important, and we can't do that when we're in a panic or an anxious or a fearful survival mode, survival place. So
mm.
that's one important piece of that architecture, right? And part of that is also the sustainable drive, is like being able to purpose. Your purpose is anchored in motivation, and so motivation is so important because we want that to outlast like the adrenaline, right? Or that panic, because as we all know or familiar with burnout, that tanks our ability to remain motivated and stay driven, um, which then leads to like resilience, right? So resilience is so important, in that we're understanding like what are our needs, right? What unmet needs are occurring, so that we can break out of that cycle of burnout. So that's so important, right? So just like the thinking factors there, we have the motivation factor, and then obviously we have the action, the adjustment factor, right? So judgment, being a visionary, drive, and just self-direction. So important.
Paul, I love this. And the needs thing is something that really clues me in, because at some of my retreats that I've hosted over the last year, both men and women are not in tune with their needs. And there's
Mhm.
something almost heroic in their point of view about not knowing what they need and not giving themselves what they need. There's something really um,
Sure.
valiant in their desire to self-sacrifice. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit, about why we need to know what we need?
Yeah, it's so important, because when we don't, or we've lost focus of what we need, whether that's internally as a leader or we're observing the team, and maybe there's a specific teammate in there that is maybe floundering in some way. For a leader to be able to articulate, hey, what are your needs? One has to be able to ask themselves that, right? So that self awareness is so important, because if our needs are unmet, then we're going to respond. And often we're going to respond in more of a survival state. And unfortunately, that drives up reactivity and drives down strategic choices. It drives down motivation as well, right? And so, being able to have good judgment of clarity, having an authentic self, and obviously having an adaptable direction is so important, that will come from a place of where our needs are being met. And so, one way that, or a few ways that we can actually begin to do that, just food for thought for those listeners, is, there's three steps to take, right? Just to identify, like, maybe I'm feeling off. What is this? Maybe we just need to start by identifying. So, labeling how you're generally feeling, right? So, are you showing up to the boardroom, to the work office? Are you getting ready in the morning and you just have this sense of dread, right? Physiologically, like tight chest, just this inner sense of panic, a stomach ache, just feeling clammy, racing thoughts. Just being able to name what's going on for yourself is so important, and really a key component to identifying what an unmet need might be, right? And I talk about psychological safety at one point, right? And so, uh, this is anxiety, right? Not strategy would be a saying, or something I would identify in a leader. It's like you're being reactive. You're responding to this anxiety. That's not strategy. So what's really going on there? What is the need? And so sometimes what is the need is just not the question of itself just isn't enough. It's what is it that I really want here, right? Like, what do I want? Like, maybe I need to feel confident. I need more autonomy. I need to feel connected. I need to feel like I'm not taking advantage of, for example. And then being able to have a reframe and act, I think, is important. So I need to feel dot dot dot, right? And so what am I going to do about that? And sometimes we have to get creative and make it up, right? And we have to be careful that we don't get ahead of ourselves and just shoot it down like, that's not going to happen. Because even just being creative and fantasizing about a fix can often lead to some movement in a call to action.
So one of the things that really stands out to me that's so critical is the reason why we have to know what we need and want is because otherwise we're going to be acting from our primal brain, our survival
Yeah.
instinct, and we're going to be
Yes.
more anxiety driven rather than strategically driven. So
Hmm.
that's huge. And honestly, I think that gives us permission at the beginning. If we don't know what we want and what we need, this is kind of a free pass to know what you want and what you need, because it's actually for the betterment of those around us. So
Hmm.
if we are looking for permission, it actually serves our loved ones, it serves our employees, even our executive leadership team, if we know what we want. Otherwise, and that doesn't mean that we act in accordance with what we want all the time. So Paul, can you
Hmm.
talk a little bit about that? Knowing what we need and knowing what we want are important, but that doesn't mean that that's what's always in the driver's seat.
That's right. I mean, so just going off of what you said, it's like the trickle down effect, right? And so that's why I really love working with leaders and executives and being in the boardroom, because I know that I'm not just talking to one, two, five, or 10 people. I'm talking to the whole organization, just concentrated to these really important leaders, right? So they're going to replicate this pillar and have techniques and a foundation for how to continuously do that, which will then translate to other folks, right? And so, and then the second part is that we can't always just act on it, because you know it's so different when I'm in my therapy office and then the executive coaching office, because the needs translate very differently, because sometimes our needs or our values are in misalignment with the organization's values. And so that's a protracted conversation that we'll have to have, whatever that is, because we come as our own individual selves. And just because we're with a company for a year or 5 or 10 or 15 or 20, we don't stay the same either. We're changing and ever evolving, and often the organization is too. And so sometimes there's going to be these misalignments, and maybe what we once needed or had is no longer available or viable. And so there's always this readjustment.
And that's actually the second pillar in being a conscious leader is strategic alignment. What you
Yes.
said is just so profound, because I think a lot of us, we evolve the business and forget that our teams are evolving themselves. So can you talk about
Yeah.
strategic alignment and how to make sure that we are effectively congruently staying aligned in the
Yeah.
evolvement of the business and ourselves?
Yeah, so strategic alignment, the second pillar, is important, again, because it takes into consideration and ensures that the organization's big picture vision is living day to day. And so um, that's important, because it's so often how we can lose focus, right? We're showing up to work every day for years or a decade or more, and the we can sometimes just become content or complacent and lose focus of that. And so, being able to just be aware of that concept, and then also to have measurable, um, just being able to assess or have metrics of how making sure that we're not falling back into like these checkpoints are so important there, right? And so, and again, it matters that execution of power, right? The clear line of sight from mission to metrics, and driving the follow through there, the engagement, which is what the leadership takes on, is how are we engaging when when we see that work matters, uh, discretionary effort source. And so we talk about micromanaging, for example, or engagement from the very beginning, an onboarding process, just that early engagement and that strategic alignment from the beginning all the way to the end, whenever that is, drives up the other point of like efficiency and priorities, right? And um, taking a look at and surgically removing inhibitors, whether busy work or decision fatigue, that like brought the micromanaging piece up again. And so that strategic management factor is really important. Managing the execution, fostering open dialogue, showing availability. That old saying, "My door is always open." Well, people don't walk through the door. That's the problem with the doors always open. You have to walk through the door and go seek out and bring people in, especially when working with teams. So fostering that transparent linkage between the why and the what, so important. Engagement, and then of course the high impact, that delivery piece. So is something that we're after, that crisp meshing messages, the metrics. What are we doing here? Is it in alignment? And here's the proof. So strategic alignment.
I loved what you said. Instead of us saying the door's always open, basically saying, hey, you can come to me anytime, we go to them. And
Yeah.
Paul, would you talk? Yeah, go ahead.
I just, because I love engagement, right? The door's always open. Is how often A question is, how often are you as an executive or a leader auditing not only your goals, who's doing that with you, who's doing that with your team?
Mm,
And what is the must-win outcome? What's your North Star? Everybody needs a North Star. It doesn't matter how long you've been with the company, and that goes back to, right, mission, the values, and then what's the commitment? How do we drive this commitment? What are the barriers to change? How do
mm.
we understand human functionality in that regard, and team dynamics, prototypical teams, as the industrial psychologist will often reference, and what does that even mean, and how does that fit into the value, the outcome of the company? And that's what
Mhm.
I do.
I love that. Paul, you gave me an example a couple weeks ago about an executive who was so involved with his work that actually his wife ended up calling his boss or somehow contacting the office. And then the office asked him to effectively have a better priority of work life balance. Can you share that story? Because I know that I didn't say it perfectly, but I thought that was such an interesting story of effectively why us as executives need to not just manage well in the
Oh,
office, but also
yes.
well at home. So can you share a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
No, I had to think back to that example. So essentially, the executive, they had gone into work to finish some things up, and I believe it was like a Friday or a Saturday. It's a little bit fuzzy now, and essentially missed their daughter's birthday party.
Mm,
And he came home, and it was basically like an ultimatum. I think anybody would in that position would feel very much like giving one, given the gravity of that situation. So that there was an ultimatum about, this can't keep happening. This has now reached a threshold where there's now relational damage in the home sphere, right? Not just with the children, but within the marriage itself. And that caught on a drastic measure of change that was not very comfortable to this executive either. And so that's when I had been in the picture, or came into the picture essentially, and helping not just the family piece repair what had happened, and then moving and continuing on working with the executive, and figuring out ways to integrate that work life which is very much possible, which is one of the facets of what I like to do in executive coaching, is helping people to map that out.
And it really further proves that we don't just leave the office and become somebody different at home, and we don't leave our home and become somebody different at the office. If we need to have this type of, using your own words of, not
Hmm.
just an open door policy, come to me anytime, but going and being proactive with our team, how are we doing that in our home with our family?
Hmm.
Are we having
Hmm.
our goals aligned with our spouse and with our children like we do with our executive team and our employees? So there's such a
Yeah.
parallel in how we lead and how we show up in business that mirrors how we need to be intentional to show up at home.
Hmm. Yeah.
Your third pillar. Do you
Yeah.
mind chatting about that a
Yeah.
little
So
bit?
yeah. So adaptive leadership. It matters because organizations are often facing rapid change, whether it's political, geopolitical,
Mm,
financial. And so these rapid changes require leaders and teams who are able to pivot, right, without losing, whether it's buy-in, that adaptive leadership. Um, the resiliency, right, is part of this adaptive leadership. How do we foster collaboration as a part of it as well, keeping teams moving forward?
mm,
How does this adaptive leader attract and develop new talents, continue to develop on the talent that's already there? So leadership versatility, that's a kind of a buzzword that we talk about. How we empower other people. So this is very much, the adaptive leader is taking these internal concepts, and they're starting to influence and negotiate with them.
mm,
Um, they're creating psychological safety, not just for themselves, right, by identifying their needs and creating space, but they're creating it for other people. So
mm,
they're creating environments where people feel comfortable taking risks, right? Adaptive risks. And there's trust, right? We're developing rapport, which goes into sense of psychological safety. And then there's clarity under pressure. There's that strategic hindsight piece that's part of the adaptive leadership. So communication structures, and really creating an atmosphere and an environment where people are sustaining that sense of place of purpose, not just for the leader, but also for the team.
I love that. And Joe Ingram on Instagram, hello, my friend, he mentioned, the same destination with a fluid path to it. And in terms of allowing a fluidity to our approach, what is necessary in terms of kind of the mindset, the heart posture to allow for fluidity more so in our lives?
So reframe that question for me one more time.
So if we want to have fluidity, adaptability, let's say,
Hmm.
when we
Hmm.
look at our goal, when we look at our destination, what
Yeah.
are, like, how do we move from a place of rigidity to adaptability? What are kind
Oh,
of those
sure.
mental practices and habits and or just principles that I can move through in order to allow for more adaptability in the way I think and show up?
Yeah. I think you might know the answer to this, or at least what I'm about to say is, this is where an executive coach comes into play. So this is somebody that is outside of the boardroom, outside of the organization, that has an objective and opportunistic, the opportunity to get to know someone well enough in their role and as a person, to identify or to further identify what they're picking up on or what they're missing, or to even consider uh, any state of like rigidity, or finding out what need or where are they struggling in their adaptability. I think that's the exact reason that an executive coach would want to be considered in that way. Um, I think other options, right, would be working with the other management teams. But sometimes that's hard to do if you don't have the right questions to ask, or the insights to go off of those questions. And so, um, here's the pitch for executive coaching is that's something that you obtain while working with one. So I think that I put that as a priority.
Yeah. Yeah. And another question that just came in is, what is the biggest roadblock for people when it comes to letting go of rigidity?
Oh gosh, we are habits, right? I mean, we are
Mm,
people of habit. And a lot of those, it's so interesting. I pull in the psychological world into the executive coaching because I'm all about habits. Whether that's relationship happens within a couple, or just within the sphere of the corporate world, that people fall in to these consistent habits that are often reinforced over time. And being able to have the motivation, well, first really to identify, wow, this is a habit that isn't working for me anymore, but it might have worked for me once upon a time. And then developing the tools, sustaining the motivation, having a plan, having a metric. It's a process, and it takes time, and it takes consistency, and I think it takes accountability as well, because these rigid habits have ways of pulling us back in, even if they create chaos or discomfort, because familiarity is what pulls people back in as well. And that's another pitfall, is just being familiar with the same routine or the same rigid habit. And so there's often uh, a, a comforting approach, saying you're going to be uncomfortable for a little while, but you'll start to see this. Let's make that a metric for motivation.
So really analyzing our habits,
Mhm.
analyzing the areas, manner in which we're comfortable, whether
Yes.
that's by a comfortable behavior or comfortable, even I'm imagining, if somebody says something we don't like, what's our default response? What are the
Yeah.
defaults and autopilots in our lives? So really taking time to
Right.
audit them.
Right. Those are
Paul,
all
this
the
has been so,
questions.
yeah, exactly. This has been so, so, so good. What would be kind of a first step? Obviously, getting an executive coach is incredibly beneficial if we do want to kind of break free I would say, in an expedited manner, having somebody
Mhm.
come in and sit
Mhm.
alongside you in the auditing of your life.
Yeah.
For those who are, okay, I want to take the first step before getting an executive coach. How would you encourage people to initiate that audit?
I think goes back to the first pillar, is being able just to begin to identify, what am I feeling? Even for people who are listening today, it's, these things are starting to resonate with me. Well, what specifically is resonating? What am I feeling uncomfortable about? Where is my misalignment? I think one exercise that I'll often have people do is to create a values sheet. Just I think it's a great exercise for anyone to identify, well, what are my values? And am I in alignment with my values? And how do I identify as a leadership, and how does that fit into my values? What are my organization's values? How does that fit into my values? And I think just doing an audit of one's values would be a great start.
Wonderful. Paul, thank you. I'm so grateful for your time today. Appreciate you, my
Thanks.
friend.
Yes, thank you.